I'm Cam Best, and I have been waiting for months to say these words. Series drops are back in Marvel Snap. For those who are unaware, series drops are actually how most cards were acquired in the early days of the game. They are a function by which cards go down through series. Currently, the cards available in the store for either collector's tokens or in spotlight caches are composed entirely of cards in Series 4 and Series 5. Via series drops, these cards can enter the Series 3 pool, making them much more easy to acquire. They can also be downgraded from Series 5, which cost 6,000 collector tokens, to Series 4, which cost 3. Now, this is actually the biggest series drop that they've ever done. 5 cards are going into Series 3, and 9 more are being downgraded into Series 4. Let's take a look at the cards and how best to use them. The first card dropping to Series 3 is Master Mold, which I think will be a welcome change to many players who like playing Ronin the Accuser, a deck that is not particularly viable at endgame, but if you're halfway through Series 3, having Master Mold accessible to you might actually make that deck a little bit more of a realistic option. I think this is a good drop for those reasons. Nobody is going out of their way to acquire Master Mold, and it's the kind of card that you can really tinker around with before that gets sort of beaten out of you by the highly optimized metagame decks that you're likely to run into when you get much higher on the collection track. That said, Ronin the Accuser is more or less the only time that this card is going to see play. After all, normally giving your opponents cards is a bad thing. Now, it can be used occasionally as a very unique and weird tech card to jam up Thanos decks, which really want to be drawing their cards as opposed to Sentinels, but right now there's just a little bit too much Loki in the metagame to make giving your opponent cards a reasonable play. Master Mold may have his time in the future, but right now he is relegated to fringy, fun Ronin the Accuser decks. Spider-Man 2099 has a solid stat line at 4/6, but his ability is a little bit lacking. The first time he moves to a new location, he will destroy one random card there. Now, this is a card that can be exciting. I can understand how you would look at this and say, okay, 4/6, reasonable body. The issue is that you end up having to use other move cards with it, and since it's not self-contained, it is dependent on the power of those other cards, and more than that, it is also dependent on how often that thing is going to kill something relevant. So, for example, think about a Thanos deck. There's really like one card in each lane that you're really trying to get rid of. The rest of the stuff is stones, and if you activate this guy, if you put effort into making his effect happen, well, you might end up in trouble when you need it to hit something specific and it doesn't. This means that this card is a little bit too much of a gamble and a little bit too reliant on other cards in order to be a top metagame threat. I've actually found use for him in decks like Phoenix Force that have those other move cards incidentally. I'm not saying that's the best build of Phoenix Force, but what I am saying is if you want to build around Spider-Man 2099, look for something that's already interested in running something like Doctor Strange or Iron Fist. He wants to go in there and then use that hybridization to go forward, because right now I don't think he makes it in a traditional move deck for many of the reasons that I've mentioned. But if you're doing something else alongside him that they have to account for, I think maybe he might be a little more useful. The next addition to Series 3 is the one I am the most excited for. That is Negasonic Teenage Warhead. She is a 3-cost 2-power card who blows up what your opponent plays in the lane after her, and I think she's honestly pretty underexplored. Now, I think most of the reason that she's underexplored is she's hard to use and not a lot of people have her. Her dropping into Series 3 will at least solve the not a lot of people have her issue. She will immediately become a card that most accounts in the game have access to, and that is awesome, because I genuinely believe there is some untapped potential here. Yes, she's not as good as Eliath, but she could kill a blob right now, and that would be pretty sick, right? Like, this is an effect that I think is genuinely useful and is only really seeing play right now in obvious shells like Cerebro 2, but once it gets into the wider populace of the game, I'm really excited to see what this can do as a lockdown type card, or just as a card that says, hey, don't go here. I think that this is a card I'm really excited to see what people do with. Right now, I do think her best deck is Cerebro 2, but the reason I'm excited for this is because I would like to know what exactly people can come up with now that they have access to this card. I don't know if her best deck is going to be Cerebro 2 forever. A note on Cerebro 2, by the way. Part of the reason it's Negasonic's best deck is not just because it costs 2, or has 2 power, I should say. Part of the reason it's Negasonic's best deck is because she goes really well with something like Storm that really, really incentivizes your opponent to play in a specific place, and then she can blow that stuff up. Like, it's not just that she fits in the deck because she works with Cerebro, it's that she fits what the deck wants to do anyway, and that is why I believe it is her current best spot. But honestly, I could see her anywhere. I wouldn't be shocked if someone played her in Thanos. Like, this is a card that I do really want to see what people can do with. I think at this point, everyone pretty much knows Stature's deal. She's a 5/6, but when you play Black Bolt or Moon Knight or Silver Samurai, she is a 1/6, and that, of course, is distinctly above rate. She hasn't been exactly a metagame card since Black Bolt and herself were nerfed a while ago, but I do think that that is the combo you're most likely to see. You should consider that a bit of a side grade to something like Devil Dinosaur as you progress through the Series 3 collection track, right? Basically, the reason these cards started seeing play, Black Bolt and Stature, was because Devil Dinosaur was very vulnerable to cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress, and Black Bolt Stature, similar amount of points, similar amount of energy, not vulnerable to those cards at all. So a lot of the decks will end up being sort of similar when you look at their basic construction. You're going to be playing decks that use tech cards, that maybe you play Stature on turn 6 alongside a tech card, or maybe you do a Zabu into a Stature plus a tech card plus another tech card where the other tech card is Shadow King. So you're like Stature, Shang, Shadow King. That's kind of her niche, is she goes in those type of like mid-range soup decks, traditional Darkhawk decks. So right now, however, those traditional Darkhawk decks have a problem, and that problem is that Blob exists, and for that reason, a lot of those traditional Darkhawk decks are now playing Leech. And if you are playing Leech in order to get rid of those blobs in your opponent's hand and keep your Darkhawk at his big beefy self, you do run into the issue that you kind of can't play Black Bolt and Stature. I do think that just generally good stats, that's kind of a good thing to have. You are interested in that. However, right now, the metagame is not particularly friendly to what Stature is trying to do for a variety of reasons, chief among them that her deck wants to play a different 5-drop that has no synergy with her, as opposed to being okay playing Black Bolt. Still, I do think Black Bolt Stature is going to be a common combo as you climb up through the ranks, and it might actually change how the early Pool 3 metagame ends up looking because of how strong it actually really is. Stegron is a card that I'm going to say a lot of the things I said about Negasonic about, but I'm going to be a lot less confident in them. Where I honestly do think there is likely a place for Negasonic that just hasn't been found due to availability, I'm a little less bullish on Stegron. When he still moved unrevealed cards, you could have convinced me that this was a guy who just needed wider availability and people to actually invest in figuring out how he was good. Now that he cannot do that, I do think it is a pretty significant risk to end up playing this guy. I don't really know what people are going to do with him. I don't have a lot of hope for him. And I think of all these cards, he's the one who is most in need of a home. So if you're looking to take in a kaiju and you have a deck idea that actually needs Stegron, let me know. I am interested despite the face I'm making. I'm just a little bit doubtful of it. Those are the 5 cards that are moving down into Series 3. This is going to be the most impactful portion of this series drop. Now, one thing to keep in mind. First, this series drop will happen on January 9th. Second, the biggest portion of this series drop is actually cards dropping to Series 4. And that gives me a little bit of pause because at this point, as a consumer, I'm not really sure what the difference between Series 4 and 5 is. I haven't bought a card with tokens out of Series 4 in a very, very, very long time, and while it is helpful that there are more cards that I can get with tokens now, I don't know how much of a needle mover this is compared to moving those cards into Series 3. To me, the meat of what this series drop is those cards coming into Series 3, and this stuff is more of like a little bit of a bonus, like a gesture of goodwill, like, hey, we haven't forgotten about doing this either. So, Series 4, though, I will say I'm really not sure how much of a difference there is between 4 and 5 right now. Obviously, the token shop, yes, but a free-to-play player doesn't get a lot of tokens, and so that token shop difference doesn't end up mattering too much. And you end up in this situation where both Series 4 and 5 cards are priced, quote-unquote, relatively equally, thanks to the Spotlight Cash system. So, yeah, I tend to think the Series 3 move downs are the ones that actually matter. That said, we are going to talk about all the Series 4 move downs as well. There are 9 of them. Let's get started. Howard the Duck is the first drop into Series 4, and frankly, I'm disappointed he isn't going into Series 3. As eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed, I currently do not own Howard the Duck, nor do I plan on purchasing Howard the Duck, so this one does very little for me. You can play Howard the Duck if you want, but the fundamental issue Howard the Duck has is that he is generally not worth putting in your decks. Now, that might sound a little bit, dismissive, but here's the reason why. You put Howard the Duck in your deck to know what your Iron Lad and your Jubilee are going to hit. Here's the thing, some of the time, that Iron Lad and Jubilee are going to hit the Howard, and that's going to make you feel really, really, really stupid. In addition, a 1-2 body is not enough to justify an effect that doesn't actually affect the board. A lot of the times, what Howard is doing is giving you, quote-unquote, permission to make the play you already were going to make. What, are you going to not play the Iron Lad on turn 4? Come on now. So Howard, for the most part, is a card that I don't know why they're charging tokens for this, and I don't know why they're still charging tokens for this, and I'm probably not going to buy him even at 3,000, even though I have, 30,000 tokens? Because it's like, why would this ever be a useful thing for me to own? I just don't know. Ghost Spider also dropping from Series 5 to Series 4. Frankly, this is a card that I feel like was in Series 5 a little bit too long, let me put it that way. At Series 4, she's actually a little bit more compelling. I don't think she's overly compelling, but it's one of those cards where it's all right, do you want to play Phoenix Force? Because she probably goes in it a decent amount of the time. And at least she has a very defined role in that sense. She's not really seen much outside of that. I think most of the time you'll see her in Phoenix Force, but I've seen some Human Torch, Iron Fist, Beast, Falcon bounce decks that are using the move cards in order to generate a really big Human Torch and then moving them back to your hand with your Beast and your Falcon and doing it again. And I think that's a very compelling thing to do. It's just a little bit less consistent than you'd want it to be. But when it goes off, it goes off. And I think that's a lot of what Ghost Spider decks tend to be. She's the card that is only played in concert with other very powerful synergies that go with her because that's the card that she is. She's not strong on her own. You use her as an activator for other things that are doing stronger things, like a Phoenix Force or a Gigantic Human Torch with your bounce stuff, right? She is a card that exists only in the context of there being other good stuff to move. So she's definitely a card to keep an eye on if they print any more move payoffs. Right now, it's pretty much Phoenix Force and those sort of off-meta, off-beat bounce decks for her. Kitty Pryde. This has been a long time coming, and I've gotten some sentiment recently where it's I don't even know if Kitty Pryde is worth purchasing anymore, and frankly, I can't do anything but agree. Kitty Pryde is a card that scales with the quality of her enablers. When Elsa was around and very, very good, Kitty Pryde was a phenomenal card to go with her. Probably the main Elsa payoff. We had Shuri Kitty decks that were using the Forge that gave +3 alongside Shuri, occasionally a Hulkbuster, to create a very large Kitty Pryde as well. That said, I don't really think that this is a card that is going to make waves in the metagame, but it is a card that I will say has shown a remarkable ability to be consistently broken across a long period of time. So just because there's no good use for her right now does not mean that there will never be a good use for her again. In fact, she's one of those cards that might just come up as a consistent problem. I don't think right now I would recommend you purchasing Kitty Pryde, but she's not the worst thing you could do with your tokens, especially now that it's 3,000, just you can likely do better. She does not really have a niche at this point in time, but this point in time is very temporary. We have an OTA coming up. We have a patch coming up. Who the hell knows how good she can get? She has been very, very good in the past. To my mind, Silver Samurai is likely a better card than you think, but not a particularly good card despite that. I think most of the time when you see Silver Samurai right now, it's because you're playing one of the Hella decks from my videos. We tend to run a lot of Silver Samurai to get some targeted discard in those lists. That's just the way Husky likes to build Hella, and Husky's the person who builds most of the Hella decks that I end up playing. So Silver Samurai, I think outside of Hela, I've played a few, like X23 Daken mid-range decks where you just play like all the cards from that season and sort of hope their synergy works out for you. It's not, it's genuinely not the worst thing you can be doing. He's just not overly exciting. And he does sort of tend to go either in Hela or with cards like Daken, X23, in a little mid-range shell. I think I saw Jeff Hoagland playing one of those that I liked. It had very good stats on Untapped for about 200 games, and a bunch of people picked it up because it was at the top of the thing when you sorted for 200 games in Infinite. A bunch of people started playing it, and then the stats kind of tanked because that's what happens when a bunch of people start playing the deck. But I do think there's like something that could reasonably be there sometimes. I'm not saying this is a good buy even at 3,000 though. It's just one of those cards where it's like, if you have an extra 3,000 and you don't know what you're doing with it, and you've got like a bunch of caches saved up and your tokens aren't going anywhere else, like, I won't blame you. I think Echo is genuinely underrated. Echo is a card that I think you could play right now in Miss Marvel decks to win mirrors, and I think that would be the main place that I would do it. But like, she is a good card. I don't want to act like she's terrible. She's just this very niche, very expensive card. And there are a lot of other cards in her niche or in similar niches when it comes to dealing with ongoing effects, such that she ends up sort of getting a bit shunted to the side. Rogue, Enchantress, even Shang-Chi, like, it doesn't deal with ongoing effects, but it'll deal with the Devil Dinosaur for sure, you know what I mean? Like, there are some situations that will call for Echo. I've seen her played in Thanos mirrors. I've seen her played in Miss Marvel mirrors. It's not entirely stupid. I've played her in Shuri in order to counteract like Professor X type stuff. Like, it's not the worst thing you could ever do. Echo is a fine to good card, and I actually think there are going to be people who benefit from having her in their collections. But like many of the rest of these cards, she's a little bit unexciting. She's not a build around. She's just a little tech piece that you can kind of run, but like, you might not really want to. I also don't know exactly what they can do to make her stronger, because as a 1/2, she's already pretty aggressively costed. And so I don't really know if she can ever get better from here. Only thing that will change for her is the context in which she exists. And right now we're actually in a pretty good contextual Echo meta, in the sense that there is a card that is a 4/15 that is almost always being played in the mid lane and kind of sucks when it isn't played in the mid lane, making it very much Echo bait. Like, this is as good as Echo has ever been, and she's still a little bit fringy. I only know a couple people who are seriously playing her at high infinite. It's not a very common thing, but it is a useful card to have in your toolbox. Phoenix Force moving to Series 4 is actually pretty sweet, honestly. I have not thought that Phoenix Force was a good enough deck to justify the purchases that it required out of Series 5. It's one of those decks that you just want to have and you don't want to actually spend anything on, but it's a very, very powerful deck as long as you know what you're doing with it. There have been multiple people, well, one person, just multiple seasons, playing Phoenix Force in the top 10 of Infinite. This is a thing that has happened before. It's a strong deck. It can be worth mastering, but I do think that it is perhaps not the best thing to make your main deck. It's just the kind of thing you're going to want to have in your back pocket, because Phoenix Force metas do pop up every so often. And now that it has actually been reverted, not reverted, they fixed the bug, so now when you clone a multiple man off your Phoenix Force, the multiple man can move too. It's effectively like an 8 power buff to your combo, which is good. But I think one of the things that happened because of that is a lot of people kind of realize that they're going to die now. Previously, they're like, I can beat a Phoenix Force. And, they're mostly wrong, but sometimes they're right. And so they stay in a little bit longer. I've seen people that retreat to like a turn 2 multiple man and a snap, because at this point, people know that means I have the Phoenix Force combo, and people can reasonably say, well, I guess I can't beat that. And I think that that might negatively impact the cube profile of the deck. That said, it's a pretty compelling combo deck to me right now, and there are multiple ways to actually try and attack the metagame with it. I personally think it's pretty cool that it is now significantly cheaper. Talk about long overdue drops. Hitmonkey was the series card, it feels like 6 or 7 months ago, and he's only now going into Series 4. That is honestly kind of wild to me. Hitmonkey used to be an extremely compelling card and has since, I think, become mildly underrated. Not that I would be playing Hitmonkey decks. I tend to think that right now he's being outperformed as a 3-drop scaler by Werewolf by Night. But he is one of those cards where he's always just sort of on the edge of being one of the best value for the energy in the game. Right now, of course, he's not. We have Werewolf by Night, who is a higher scaling 3-cost card. Previous to that, we had Elsa, who was a higher scaling 2-cost card. Great job on that one. But Hitmonkey is one of those cards that could end up being dangerous. Again, he was even being played during the Elsa meta. I mean, Elsa helped a lot with that, but like you were playing him with Thor, Jane Foster, all the zeros, Yellow Jacket, things like that, and just making very large Hitmonkeys. And that is the kind of strategy that I think is likely the best place for him right now. And I wouldn't even say it's all that bad, because right now what that deck is trying to do is just sort of poorly positioned against the metagame, by which I mean it is a deck that explodes on turn 6 right now. There's Thanos decks, there's other lockdown decks that are really punishing you if you try to explode on turn 6. When you are one of those turn 6 decks, you are really looking for avoiding cards like Professor X, like Storm, that will prevent you from getting all of your cards down for that Hitmonkey. Obviously, Hitmonkey wants to be played late, but he also wants to be played with as empty of a board as possible, so you can play as much stuff with him as possible and get the most value out of him. And that means that he tends to be a little bit weak to strategies that limit your ability to play cards on those final few turns of the game. Now, I'm not saying he's never going to be good again. I definitely am not saying that, but right now, I don't really think he has a niche in the current metagame. That said, he is a card that has been extremely good in the past. Daken downgrading to Series 4 is, I think, a probably good change. He's one of those cards where it's like, all right, nobody should spend 6,000 tokens on Daken, for the love of God. So I still don't know if people should spend 3,000 tokens on Daken, for the love of God, but it's a little bit more of a reasonable conversation. I would still probably say no. Daken is a card that is, I think, just a little bit too fair in his implementation to ever be a true competitor at the top of the metagame. He's a card that has seen play in discard decks before, and he has seen play in some sort of mid-rangey Silver Samurai type stuff like that deck I mentioned previously when talking about Silver Samurai. It's good they both downgraded at the same time, but I don't think those are decks that you're going to want to heavily invest in, and I don't think this is a card that you're going to want to heavily invest in. It's fine. He's a fine card, but your tokens can always do better than fine. Finally, Lady Deathstrike is actually a card I think is legitimately underrated, but I don't think that moving just to Series 4 is going to be enough to make her, you know, properly rated, if that makes any sense. I think she's legitimately quite powerful right now, but I do think that it's the kind of card that you need to really invest in to make powerful, and it's a little bit too finicky some of the time, so she's not like she's like consistently good. It's just that when she's good, she's really good. And I guess I just wish this was one of the cards that got downgraded in Series 3, because if she was in Series 3, that'd be legitimately a chance for people to really experience what she can be. And in Series 4, I mean, I gotta be honest with you, I don't know if she's a good use of your tokens. I'm saying this a lot. It's like they dropped a bunch of cards that were definitely not good uses of 6,000 tokens, but I'm also not sure they're good uses of 3,000 tokens. And so you just end up in a spot where it's like, I don't know how much this actually changes dropping from Series 5 to Series 4. I just don't. In addition, I had a few conversations with the devs, and I've been given permission to sort of paraphrase the following. That is, series drops will continue to happen, and that they will look a lot like this. They are not currently set in stone, and they don't want to put any specific limiters on when they're going to happen, but they do envision them happening a couple times in the coming year, starting with this one, a couple times over the course of the next of the year. I don't really know how to parse that exactly. That could be, 2 times a year. It could be 4 times a year. I don't actually know. I will say that from what I can gather, this is just my Occam's razor theory, but I'm guessing that what happened and why the things went this way with series drops was that they announced flexible series drops. They didn't drop some cards, and then what happened was they noticed all their metrics were booming, basically. If you think about it, we just had an entire metagame that we are in the midst of right now, defined by a card that just came out. That wasn't happening before the Spotlight Cash system and the implementation of flexible, quote-unquote, series drops. And I think a lot of that is because people were willing to take a miss on the new card and wait for it to get to them for free. not giving a schedule seems like a way of splitting that difference. They don't want people to know whether or not a card is going to be downgraded, because if they know it's going to be downgraded, then nobody will want to buy it. And I think we can all agree that the fact that a new card can shake up the metagame is actually a good thing. That said, there is a question of like exactly how much I guess enforced lack of knowledge there has to be to make this system work, would be how I would phrase it. I am a little bit hesitant to endorse it fully because of that, because it's like, all right, so I get it. I can definitely see the upsides. We just had a metagame that was all blob centric, and that probably doesn't happen without the spotlight cache system making blob accessible, and without the flexible series drops, meaning that people don't feel stupid for investing their resources into blob because it'll just downgrade in 2 months. I get it. I totally understand why that is a good thing. I do. But I do have, like, you know, just a little bit of hesitance looking at the cards that have been downgraded. It's a lot of cards that are not particularly exciting, and maybe that's good, right? Maybe it's good that they got the cards that kind of suck out of Series 4 and Series 5 and are looking at continuing to do that, because the cards that aren't worth spending on are just languishing there with nothing to do. But doesn't that sort of explicitly tie expensiveness to how good a card is, right? Like, you look at a card like Jeff or Iron Lad, which is or not downgrading, and you kind of wonder, are they ever going to downgrade? And I think I understand why they wouldn't. Those are exactly the kind of cards that you want in Series 4 and Series 5, and having them downgrade wouldn't actually do anything other than make you less money, because those are the cards everyone can agree are actually worth spending the tokens on and the caches on. So there's this weird give and take here where I think their job is to make every card in Series 4 and 5 worth it, and that means that the strongest cards will tend to end up there and stay there for longer. And I guess my question to you is that cool with you? Because, like, I've been thinking about it, and it's like, it kind of already been like that. So maybe I'm just late to the party on this. But I was definitely thinking about it, and it's like, you know, I think somewhere along the way it became because you can get these cards free to play, it just takes longer. But somewhere along the way, it's like, oh man, no, this is actually like kind of a little bit of an investment, isn't it? Right? Like, and I do think that that is something that I've noticed. Definitely is how I'll phrase that. That said, I mean, I can definitely, like I said, I can see the upsides, right? The blob meta, like everyone's playing this new card that's super sick. Like, and it's not like everyone just like feels forced to buy stuff because, like, Lord knows, probably a lot of people aren't getting Havoc. Like, it is definitely like, I get it. I see the upsides. I imagine it's great for them as well. I guess maybe if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I am kind of interested to see what the reaction to this kind of series drop is, which to me strikes me as like sort of very explicitly saying, like, we're getting the stuff that you don't want to buy out of the realm where you have to buy it. And, you know, on the one hand, that's definitely good. It's a smart thing to do. And on the other hand, it is very, like, it is, I guess, implicitly saying the good stuff, the stuff that's worth it, that's going to stay up. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments. I still read every one. I haven't said that in a while, but I really, really do. Thank you so much. I'll say another thing I haven't said in a while. Remember to like, subscribe. My dopamine chemicals go burr when I see those numbers go up. It makes me feel so good. Thank you. Thank you so much. As always, I'm McCann Best. You've been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.